The gun camera footage runs at 18 frames per second. Black and white, grainy. The timestamp in the lower right corner flickers between readable and static. April 1967, somewhere over North Vietnam, altitude and heading data cycling through corruption and clarity. The MiG-21 appears small at first, just a dark shape against lighter sky. Then the F-105 pilot's tracking puts it center frame, and you can see the delta wing configuration, the intake cone, the cruciform tail surfaces. 2 seconds of footage where the MiG fills maybe 60% of the frame before the M61 Vulcan cannon fires. The 20mm rounds don't show up as tracers in gun camera stills. What shows is the effect. Parts separating from the fuselage, the MiG rolling right, then the frame going empty as the target exits the tracking envelope. 3 seconds total from first appearance to loss of visual. What the footage doesn't show is how an F-105 Thunderchief, a strike aircraft designed to deliver nuclear weapons at supersonic speed into Soviet territory, ended up in a turning fight with a purpose-built interceptor at 12,000 feet over Hanoi. The F-105D weighed 52,000 pounds fully loaded. Maximum speed Mach 2.08 clean, which nobody ever flew in combat because clean meant no bombs, no external fuel tanks, no mission. Combat-loaded weight pushed past 50,000 pounds. The airplane earned the nickname Thud from early accidents, the sound it made hitting the ground. Crews kept using the name anyway. Some names stick. Republic Aviation designed it as a nuclear strike platform. Single-seat internal weapons bay, sized for tactical nukes. Terrain-following capability for low-level penetration. The Air Force ordered 833 of them through the 1950s and early 1960s. By 1965, the mission changed. No nuclear strikes. Conventional bombing over North Vietnam instead. Bridge interdiction. Power plant destruction. SAM site suppression. The kind of missions where MiG interceptors waited. The gun camera footage exists because someone at Tactical Air Command required documentation. Every air-to-air engagement needed verification. Gun cameras recorded automatically when the trigger was pulled. Film got pulled after landing, developed, reviewed. Confirmed kills required clear evidence of destruction or pilot ejection. Probable kills got recorded but not counted. The difference mattered for squadron tallies and pilot records. This particular footage, archived now at the National Museum of the United States Air Force, shows an F-105D from the 421 Saint Tactical Fighter Squadron engaging a North Vietnamese Air Force MiG-21PF fishbed. The engagement lasted maybe 90 seconds total. The footage captures 3 seconds of that. The pilot's name is in the declassified mission report. The MiG pilot's name took decades to surface in Vietnamese records. The frame rate makes everything look slower than it happened. 18 frames per second versus the actual closure rate of 2 aircraft at combined speeds exceeding 1,000 miles per hour. What looks like a controlled tracking shot was the pilot fighting control inputs, compensating for the Thud's tendency to wallow in turns, managing throttle and G-loading and target angle, all simultaneously, while wondering if the MiG's wingman was setting up a shot on him. The footage flickers. The timestamp corrupts. The MiG appears, gets hit, disappears. 3 seconds of film documenting something that shouldn't have worked. A bomb truck fighting an interceptor and winning. The Vietnam People's Air Force received its first MiG-21PF fishbed interceptors in early 1966. Soviet instructors came with them. The training syllabus emphasized speed and altitude advantage. Hit the Americans during their bombing runs, exploit their vulnerability when loaded with ordnance, disengage before they could respond. The tactical math looked favorable. MiG-21 maximum speed, Mach 2.05, roughly 1,385 miles per hour at altitude. Rate of climb, 35,800 feet per minute clean. Service ceiling, 57,400 feet. Armament, 123mm Gryazev Shipunov, G. Eshish, 23 cannon, 2 K-13 Atoll infrared guided missiles copied from captured AIM-9 Sidewinders, F-105 Thunderchief maximum speed, Mach 2.08 clean, but combat-loaded performance dropped catastrophically. A Thud carrying 6 750-pound bombs, 2 external fuel tanks, and a full ammunition load for its M61 Vulcan cannon struggled to maintain Mach 1.2. Turn radius suffered. Acceleration suffered. Everything that kept you alive in a dogfight degraded under operational weight. Soviet doctrine, which the VPAF adopted wholesale, treated this as decisive advantage. The interceptor engages the strike aircraft during its most vulnerable phase. The strike aircraft cannot maneuver effectively without jettisoning ordnance. Jettisoning ordnance means mission failure. Either outcome favors the defender. North Vietnamese ground-controlled intercept stations tracked American formations from takeoff. Radar coverage over the Red River Delta was redundant, overlapping, comprehensive. Controllers vectored MiG-21 flights toward optimal intercept geometry. The Americans broadcast their intentions. Strike packages assembled over Laos flew predictable routes to targets around Hanoi and Haiphong, egressed along corridors that avoided the heaviest SAM concentrations. VPAF commanders calculated they were fighting a defensive war with the advantages defenders should have: interior lines, short flight times from airfields to combat area, ground-based radar direction, aircraft optimized for intercept missions. The Americans were flying strike missions hundreds of miles from their bases in Thailand and South Vietnam, loaded with bombs, predictable in their approach profiles. One intercept transcript from March 1967 mentions a MiG-21 pilot reporting unusual smoke trail color from an F-105 formation, described as darker than normal. This detail appears in translated VPAF radio logs obtained decades later. Never explained in any after-action analysis I found. Might have been engine setting, might have been atmospheric conditions, might have been the particular batch of JP4 fuel those Thuds were burning that day. The report goes nowhere. No follow-up observations, no tactical significance anyone documented. Just one pilot noting something that looked different to him and some intelligence officer writing it down. The larger calculation stood: MiG-21s should dominate F-105s in air-to-air combat. Speed advantage. Altitude advantage. Weapons optimized for fighter versus fighter engagements. The Thunderchief carried the Vulcan cannon primarily for ground suppression, strafing runs against targets of opportunity. Its AIM-9 Sidewinder capability was secondary, almost an afterthought in the design process. What Hanoi calculated and what happened over the Red River Valley starting in April 1967 were different things. The Americans didn't follow the tactical assumptions. F-105 pilots jettisoned ordnance and fought. They reversed into attacks instead of maintaining evasive flight profiles. They used the Vulcan cannon the way the MiG-21 pilots used the GSH-23. Aggressively, at close range, without hesitation. Soviet advisors kept emphasizing proper intercept doctrine. The VPAF kept losing MiG-21s to aircraft that weren't supposed to fight back effectively. April 4, 1967, Captain Max Brestel, 421st Tactical Fighter Squadron, flying F-105, D, tail number 6, 2-4284. Strike mission against a railroad bridge near Hanoi. 4-ship formation, each Thud carrying 6 750-pound bombs, 2 external fuel tanks, full ammunition load for the M61 Vulcan. The MiG-21 appeared from above and behind. Standard VPAF intercept profile. Diving attack from altitude, building speed, closing to weapons range before the Americans could react effectively. Ground controllers had vectored the interceptor perfectly. The geometry favored the attacker. Brestel saw the launch. K-13 Atoll missile coming off the MiG's rail, infrared seeker tracking his engine exhaust. He broke hard left, jettisoned the external tanks first. They went tumbling away, reducing drag instantly. Then the bombs, 750-pound weapons, falling toward North Vietnamese countryside instead of the target bridge. Mission failure. But the F-105 suddenly weighed 9,000 pounds less. The MiG pilot probably expected the American to run, dive for the deck, head for the border, get out of the engagement area. Soviet doctrine emphasized this pattern. Strike aircraft avoid combat. Interceptors control the engagement. Everyone goes home. The Atoll missile missed. Proximity fuse failed, or seeker lost lock, or Brestel's brake was violent enough to defeat the tracking solution. What happened next wasn't in the VPAF playbook. Brestel reversed, pulled the F-105 around in a climbing turn back toward the MiG. The Thunderchief, now light, now clean, now maneuverable in ways it never was with ordnance attached, closed the radius. The MiG-21 pilot tried to extend. Afterburner lit, acceleration building, putting distance between himself and the threat that shouldn't exist. But the F-105 had the angle. Brestel's turn put him inside the MiG's escape vector. Not much, maybe 30 degrees of advantage. Enough. AIM-9 Sidewinder tone in his headset. The seeker head locked on the MiG's exhaust plume. Brestel squeezed the trigger. The missile came off the left outboard pylon, motor ignited, tracking solution solid. Flight time maybe 4 seconds. The Sidewinder connected with the MiG-21's tailpipe. Warhead detonated. Fuselage broke apart aft of the wing root. First confirmed F-105, kill against a MiG-21. North Vietnamese records acknowledged the loss. Pilot ejected, recovered. Soviet advisors wrote reports analyzing the engagement. American intelligence intercepted radio traffic, showing confusion among VPAF ground controllers. The intercept that should have worked didn't. The physics shouldn't have favored Brestel. MiG-21 in its designed role against F-105 in a role it wasn't built for. But the engagement developed wrong from the VPAF perspective. Their pilot committed to a single-pass attack. When it failed, he tried to disengage. The American didn't let him. Brestel landed at Takli Royal Thai Air Force Base with empty weapons pylons and gun camera footage showing the kill. Maintenance crews downloaded the film. Intelligence officers verified the engagement sequence. The bridge near Hanoi sat undamaged. Brestel's bombs were scattered across farmland, somewhere in Bac Ninh province. Mission failure by any tactical standard. But the MiG-21 was gone, and the tactical assumption that F-105s couldn't fight MiG-21s effectively needed revision. Word spread through the fighter wings in Thailand. Thud drivers started thinking differently about what to do when MiGs bounced them during bombing runs. The gun camera footage from April 4th still exists in Air Force archives. 3 seconds of film showing a MiG-21 taking cannon hits and breaking apart. Evidence that the calculated advantages didn't always matter. The M61 Vulcan cannon mounted in the F-105's nose put out 6,000 rounds per minute when the trigger stayed down. 6 rotating barrels, 20mm rounds. Each aircraft carried 1,029 rounds of ammunition at maximum rate of fire that gave you roughly 10 seconds of shooting before the gun went dry. Nobody held the trigger that long. Pilots fired in bursts. Half second, maybe a full second if the tracking solution was solid. 3 to 5 bursts per engagement if you were conservative. MiG-21 armament. 1. G-23 twin-barrel cannon, 200 rounds of 23mm ammunition. 2. K-13 Atoll missiles. Once the missiles were gone and the cannon ammunition expended, the MiG became a very fast unarmed aircraft. The weapons load optimized for brief intercept missions. Get to altitude, make 1 or 2 passes, land and rearm. The engagement geometry changed everything. If the MiG's initial attack failed, missile missed, cannon pass ineffective, and the F-105 pilot chose to fight instead of flee, suddenly the MiG had a problem. The fishbed's turn radius at certain speeds and altitudes wasn't dramatically better than a clean Thunderchief. Soviet designers prioritized speed and climb rate over sustained turning performance. The MiG-21 was an interceptor, not a dogfighter. F-105 pilots trained for air combat maneuvering despite flying a strike aircraft. The syllabus at Nellis Air Force Base included ACM courses: energy management, weapons employment, defensive reactions. The institutional assumption: any pilot might end up in a turning fight, so train everyone. Wild Weasel crews, F-105, F-2-seaters hunting SAM sites, practiced especially aggressive tactics. They flew into the most heavily defended airspace deliberately, accepted engagements other missions avoided. The cultural difference mattered more than the technical specifications. USAF treated all pilots as potential dogfighters regardless of aircraft type. VPAF trained MiG-21 pilots for specific intercept profiles, follow ground controller directions, execute attack geometry as briefed, disengage when instructed. The Soviet model emphasized centralized control and doctrine compliance. American pilots had more autonomy. Flight leads made tactical decisions without waiting for ground controller approval. Individual pilots adapted to circumstances in real time. When a MiG bounced them during a bomb run, the decision to jettison ordnance and engage was the pilot's, not some controllers 50 miles away. The Thunderchief had another advantage nobody calculated initially: visibility. The canopy gave the pilot good situational awareness. Rearward visibility wasn't great. No fighter has perfect rearward visibility, but adequate. MiG-21 early models had terrible rearward visibility. The pilot sat under a cramped canopy with limited field of view. In a turning fight, that disadvantage compounded. The American could track the MiG through most of the engagement. The Vietnamese pilot lost sight of the F-105 and had to rely on ground controller calls. Weapons training made the difference in close engagements. Air Force gunnery courses emphasized deflection shooting, lead pursuit, lag pursuit. Pilots practiced on towed targets, learned the sight picture for various aspects and ranges. When an F-105 got a MiG-21 in the gun sight at 800 feet range, the pilot knew how to put rounds on target. The MiG-21 was faster, better climb rate, higher ceiling, all the advantages that mattered in an intercept mission against bombers. But in a turning fight below 15,000 feet between two aircraft that had both committed to close combat, those advantages meant less. The F-105 could compete. Sometimes the F-105 won. Nobody at Republic Aviation designed the Thunderchief for this role. It happened anyway. Soviet intercept doctrine assumed bombers wouldn't fight back effectively. MiG-21 tactics optimized for single-pass attacks against formations maintaining straight and level flight to target. Dive from altitude, build speed, close to missile range, fire, disengage. The entire engagement profile lasted maybe 90 seconds, works perfectly against B-52s flying bombing missions over defended territory. Doesn't work against fighter bombers with competent pilots willing to jettison ordnance and reverse into the threat. The VPAF inherited this doctrine completely. Soviet advisors wrote the training curriculum. Soviet instructors taught the intercept geometry. Soviet tactical manuals, translated into Vietnamese, specified engagement procedures step by step. Ground controllers directed MiG flights using Soviet GCI protocols. The institutional framework came from Moscow, adapted minimally for local conditions. The doctrine emphasized preserving aircraft and pilot over achieving kills. Risk-averse, by American standards. If the target maneuvered unexpectedly, disengage. If the intercept geometry looked unfavorable, abort. Return to base? Refuel? Try again next mission. The Soviet Air Defense Forces, PVO Streny, operated this way defending USSR airspace. Makes sense when protecting your homeland against strategic bombers. You have time. You have depth. You can wait for optimal conditions. Makes less sense over North Vietnam when American strike packages are hitting bridges and power plants daily, and you need to stop them now, not next sortie. The tactical problem shifted from defensive intercept to offensive counter-air. Different mission, different requirements, different acceptable risk calculations. Soviet doctrine didn't adjust fast enough. The training manuals from this period, I've read translations. Declassified copies exist in various archives. They're meticulous about energy management and GCI procedures. Emphasize altitude advantage and speed advantage as decisive factors. Maintain higher altitude than target. Maintain higher speed than target. Use these advantages to dictate engagement terms. Control the geometry. Force the enemy to react rather than act. All technically correct. All tactically sound against the threat those manuals anticipated. Strategic bombers, transport aircraft, maybe some fighter escorts that would prioritize defending their charges over pursuing attackers. The doctrine assumed rational opponents following predictable patterns. American Thud pilots weren't rational by Soviet standards. They dropped their bombs and fought. They accepted disadvantageous geometry and won anyway through superior gunnery. They ignored the assumption that strike aircraft should avoid combat. Wild Weasel crews actively sought engagements while simultaneously hunting SAM sites, flying into the most heavily defended airspace, accepting MiG threats and surface-to-air threats simultaneously, completing the mission anyway. The Americans weren't following anyone's doctrine. They adapted in real time. Flight leads made tactical decisions based on immediate circumstances. Individual pilots exploited opportunities as they appeared. The institutional flexibility, the assumption that pilots could think for themselves and deviate from briefed procedures when necessary, gave them options Soviet doctrine didn't account for. VPAF ground controllers kept directing intercepts according to the manual. MiG-21 pilots kept executing attacks as trained. Some missions worked perfectly. The Americans got bounced, jettisoned ordnance, fled, mission failed. But increasingly, the pattern shifted. F-105s stayed and fought. MiG-21s disengaged per doctrine, and the Americans pursued anyway. The calculated advantages, speed, altitude, optimized weapons, mattered less when the fight devolved into close-range maneuvering below 10,000 feet. Soviet advisors wrote reports noting unexpected adversary capabilities, recommended revised training emphasis, suggested tactical adjustments. The institutional response took months. Meanwhile, American strike packages kept coming, and F-105 pilots kept proving that doctrine and reality sometimes diverged. May 13, 1967. Captain William Barthelmess, 354th Tactical Fighter Squadron, engaged MiG-21 near Kep Airfield. Strike mission against railroad yards. 4 MiGs bounced the formation during egress. Barthelmess jettisoned ordnance reversed. Got a Sidewinder tone at 4,000 feet range. The missile tracked. MiG-21 destroyed. North Vietnamese records confirm the loss. June 3rd. Major Fred Tracy, 469th Tactical Fighter Squadron, MiG-21 probable. Gun camera footage shows hits on the fuselage, but no observed destruction. The MiG departed the engagement, trailing smoke. Tracy claimed probable. Intelligence couldn't verify wreckage or pilot recovery. The claim stayed probable. June 5th. Captain Lawrence Hopp, 421st Tactical Fighter Squadron, MiG-21, confirmed destroyed. Vulcan cannon engagement at 800 feet range. The gun camera footage is exceptionally clear for once. You can see the 20mm rounds impacting the wing root. Structural failure. Wing separated. Aircraft tumbled. Pilot ejected. Confirmed kill. The pattern developing through spring and summer, 1967. F-105. Formations increasingly aggressive when bounced by MiGs. Ordnance jettison becoming standard response rather than emergency procedure. Pilots briefed on it. Flight leads expected it. Lose the bombs. Fight the MiG. Survive. Land. Rearm. Try the mission again tomorrow. Wild Weasel crews proved particularly effective. The F-105 F2-seat variant carried electronic warfare officers in the back seat. Their primary mission? Hunt SAM sites, suppress surface-to-air threats. But the EWOs managed radar warning receivers, tracked multiple threats simultaneously, gave the pilot situational awareness that single-seat Thud drivers lacked. When MiGs appeared during SAM suppression missions, the crew division helped. Pilot focused on flying and fighting. EWO managed the threat picture and called out contacts. July 5th. Major Kenneth Bell, Wild Weasel crew, MiG-17, destroyed with Vulcan cannon. The engagement happened while Bell's F-105F was actively evading SAM launches. 2 surface-to-air missiles in flight. MiG-17 making a gun pass. Bell maneuvering against both threats simultaneously. He got the MiG. Both SAMs missed. Landed with battle damage from anti-aircraft artillery that hit him during the fight. The mission tape, cockpit voice recorder, captures the EWO calling threats while Bell's handling the stick, multitasking under conditions that should have been impossible. August 23rd. Captain Carl Richter, 421st Tactical Fighter Squadron, MiG-17 destroyed. Richter already had 2 kills. This made him the only F-105 pilot with 3 confirmed air-to-air victories, all with the Vulcan cannon. All at ranges under 1,000 feet. Gun camera footage from all 3 engagements shows the same pattern. Close pursuit, brief tracking window, accurate fire, target destruction. Richter's gunnery was exceptional even by fighter pilot standards. The tally built through summer. Not every engagement ended in American victory. F-105Es got shot down. Pilots died or went to prison camps. SAMs killed more Thuds than MiGs ever did. But the air-to-air record showed strike aircraft competing against interceptors and winning often enough that tactical assumptions needed revision. Intelligence officers tracked the pattern. Sortie rates, engagement frequencies, kill ratios. The data showed F-105 pilots achieving air-to-air success rates comparable to dedicated air superiority fighters in certain circumstances. When ordnance was jettisoned early, when the pilot committed to the fight, when gunnery was accurate, the Thunderchief could win. Nobody at Tactical Air Command expected this. The F-105 was supposed to bomb targets and avoid MiGs. Instead, Thud drivers were hunting them. The complete F-105 air-to-air record over Vietnam. 27.5 confirmed kills. 27 MiGs destroyed outright. 1 shared kill with an F-4 Phantom, where both pilots fired and both hits contributed to the destruction. The half kill gets counted in official tallies because confirmation was solid, but attribution was split. Breakdown by aircraft type: 16 MiG-17 Frescos, 11 MiG-21 fish beds, 1 half-credit MiG-17. The MiG-17 kills made tactical sense. Subsonic fighter versus subsonic strike aircraft, closer performance match. The MiG-21 kills were harder to explain. Purpose-built supersonic interceptors losing to bomb haulers 11 times suggested something fundamental about engagement geometry and pilot aggression. Mattering more than design specifications. Weapon breakdown: 24 kills with M61 Vulcan cannon, 3 with AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles, one shared kill method unclear from records. The gun dominated because most engagements developed into close-range maneuvering fights, where the Vulcan's rate of fire and the pilot's gunnery training decided outcomes. Sidewinders worked when geometry allowed. Clean shot, good seeker tone, target not maneuvering violently. But most fights got messy fast. Loss rates tell the brutal side. F-105. Losses to all causes over Vietnam. 382 aircraft. Combat losses, operational losses, accidents, everything. The Thunderchief bled worse than any other American aircraft type in theater. Surface-to-air missiles killed most of them. Anti-aircraft artillery killed plenty. MiGs killed some. Mechanical failures, pilot error, weather all contributed. But air-to-air specifically shows different picture. When F-105 pilots engaged MiGs in deliberate maneuvering combat, not ambush during bomb runs, but actual committed dogfights, the success rate was competitive. The losses happened during strike missions when formations couldn't jettison ordnance, couldn't maneuver effectively, had to maintain attack profiles despite threats. Those missions killed pilots and destroyed aircraft. The distinction matters. F-105 as a dogfighter, surprisingly capable. F-105 as a strike aircraft operating in heavily defended airspace, catastrophically vulnerable. The 27.5 kills came from situations where pilots chose to fight. The hundreds of losses came from situations where pilots had no choice but to press the attack and accept the risks. Statistical comparison with dedicated fighters operating same time frame. F-4 Phantom crews achieved higher overall kill counts, but flew more air superiority missions. F-8 Crusader pilots had better kill-to-loss ratios, but flew fewer missions into heavy defenses. The F-105 was doing a different job. The air-to-air kills were almost accidental byproducts of strike missions gone wrong. 7th Air Force Intelligence compiled engagement analysis in late 1967. The report noted F-105 success in air combat exceeded predictions, recommended continued emphasis on air combat maneuvering training for strike pilots, acknowledged ordnance jettison as tactically acceptable when engaged by fighters. The institutional learning happened slowly, but it happened. Nobody claimed the Thunderchief was a great fighter. It wasn't designed for that. Republic Aviation built it to deliver nuclear weapons at supersonic speed, survive the blast, return to base. Air-to-air capability was tertiary to the design requirements, but the pilots made it work anyway through aggression and training and willingness to fight when doctrine said they should run. 27.5 MiGs destroyed. Numbers the North Vietnamese acknowledged in their own records. Numbers confirmed through gun camera footage and wreckage analysis and pilot debriefings. Evidence that aircraft capabilities mattered less than pilot willingness to commit and skill to execute. The statistics exist in official Air Force histories now. Cold numbers and tables. They don't capture what it felt like to jettison 750-pound bombs and reverse into a MiG-21 at 8,000 feet over Hanoi. VPAF tactical adjustments appeared mid-1967. Soviet advisors recognized the pattern. Single MiG-21s attacking F-105 formations weren't surviving at acceptable rates. The intercept doctrine needed modification. New emphasis on coordinated multi-aircraft attacks. 2 or 3 MiG-21s engaging simultaneously from different aspects. Harder for American pilots to defend against multiple threats. Ground-controlled intercept procedures evolved. Controllers started directing more complex geometries. Instead of simple diving attacks from altitude, they vectored MiGs to bracket targets. Forced the Americans to choose which threat to counter. If the F-105 reversed into one MiG, the other had a firing solution. Theory worked better than execution. American formations adapted with mutual support tactics. Wingmen covering flight leads. Coordinated breaks. The complexity increased on both sides. MiG-21 pilots received revised instructions. Disengage faster if targets maneuvered. Don't commit to extended turning fights. Make the pass, assess results, exit the engagement area. Return to base if the intercept geometry degraded. Preserve aircraft and pilot for next mission. The guidance made tactical sense, but created operational problem. The Americans kept coming. Daily strike packages against targets around Hanoi and Haiphong. The VPAF couldn't refuse combat indefinitely. Letting every formation through unopposed meant bridges collapsed, power plants burned, transportation networks fragmented. Strategic imperatives forced MiG pilots into engagements despite tactical disadvantages. Soviet advisor reports from this period, declassified in Russian archives decades later, note unexpected adversary capabilities in air combat maneuvering. Diplomatic phrasing. What they meant. American strike pilots were better trained and more aggressive than Soviet doctrine anticipated. Recommendations included revised training curriculum, emphasizing energy management in turning fights, and improved coordination between ground controllers and airborne pilots. The institutional response took months to implement. Training syllabuses required approval from Soviet Air Force Command. New procedures needed translation and distribution to VPAF units. Pilot retraining while maintaining operational sortie rates had created scheduling problems. Meanwhile, F-105s kept scoring kills. August through December 1967 saw VPAF losses mount. Not catastrophic, but concerning. Each MiG-21 lost represented significant investment, Soviet aircraft, Soviet training, Vietnamese pilot with months of flight hours. Replacement rates couldn't match attrition if the trend continued. Sortie frequencies decreased slightly. Controllers became more selective about which intercepts to authorize. North Vietnamese tactical analysis, available through intelligence intercepts and later archival releases, acknowledged the problem without admitting fundamental doctrinal failure. Reports emphasized need for better pilot training, improved ground control procedures, more sophisticated tactics, never stated explicitly, strike aircraft shouldn't be this dangerous. The Soviet advisory mission expanded in early 1968. More instructors, more detailed tactical guidance. Some Soviet pilots reportedly flew combat missions under Vietnamese markings. Documentation on this remains disputed. What's confirmed? Increased emphasis on avoiding extended engagements with F-105 formations unless conditions heavily favored the interceptor. By late 1968, the pattern stabilized. VPAF maintained intercept capabilities, but exercised them more cautiously. American strike packages still faced MiG threats, but engagement frequencies dropped from peak 1967 levels. Both sides adapted. Both sides learned. The tactical equilibrium shifted toward mutual respect rather than assumed superiority. F-4 Phantoms gradually replaced F-105ES in some roles through 1968. Dedicated air superiority fighters took over more of the MiG engagement mission. Thuds concentrated on strike operations and Wild Weasel SAM suppression. The last F-105 air-to-air kill happened November 1968. After that, other aircraft handled the fighter missions. Soviet advisors kept writing reports. VPAF kept adjusting tactics. The Americans kept bombing. The air war continued with different participants, but the lessons from 1967 stayed learned. Strike aircraft could fight back. Sometimes they won. Every F-105 air-to-air victory came with a cost nobody calculated in the kill tallies. Jettisoned ordnance. 6 750-pound bombs tumbling toward North Vietnamese farmland instead of the briefed target. The bridge stayed standing. The power plant kept running. The railroad yard remained operational. Mission failure by any tactical standard that mattered. Strike package planning assumed certain attrition rates. aircraft lost to SAMs, to anti-aircraft artillery, to operational failures. Planners built redundancy into mission assignments. If one 4-ship flight got knocked down, the other flights still delivered enough ordnance to achieve target effects. What planners didn't account for: entire formations jettisoning bombs to fight MiGs and returning to base with empty pylons and gun camera footage. The target went unbombed, had to be restruck, next day, next week, whenever another mission could be scheduled. North Vietnamese repair crews had time to fix damage from previous raids. Air defense networks had time to reposition. The tactical success, MiG destroyed, produced strategic delay. Wild weasel losses mounted through 1967 and 1968. SAM suppression missions put F-105 FS into the most heavily defended airspace deliberately. Hunting SA-2 sites meant flying predictable patterns at altitudes where surface-to-air missiles worked best. When MiGs bounced wild weasel flights, the crews faced simultaneous threats: missiles coming up, fighters coming down, anti-aircraft artillery filling the middle altitudes. Some crews handled it, destroyed the MiG, evaded the SAMs, completed the mission. Carl Richter did it. Kenneth Bell did it. Others died trying. The F-105 F loss rate exceeded single-seat F-105 D losses per sortie. Two-man crews meant twice the casualties when aircraft went down. Prison camp populations included disproportionate numbers of wild weasel pilots and EWOs. The primary mission suffered. Every engagement with MiGs meant diverted attention from SAM sites. Every jettisoned ordnance load meant one less Iron Hand mission completed. Strike packages depended on wild weasel suppression. When the suppression failed, more strike aircraft died to SAMs. The tactical interconnections compounded. Attrition forced changes through late 1967. F-4 Phantoms took over more air superiority missions, dedicated MiG caps, combat air patrols specifically hunting enemy fighters, reduced the burden on strike flights. F-105 ADS concentrated on missions where their capabilities matched requirements: low-level penetration, precision bombing. Wild weasel operations against specific high-value SAM sites. The aircraft wore out faster than replacement rates sustained. High sortie frequencies, heavy combat loads, damage from anti-aircraft fire that got patched and returned to service. Airframes accumulated stress, systems degraded. By 1968, the F-105 fleet showed the strain. Maintenance hours per flight hour increased. Mission-capable rates decreased. Some squadrons couldn't generate full 4-ship flights from available aircraft. Tactical Air Command started planning the transition. F-4s would replace Thuds in the strike role eventually. F-111S would take over some missions when they finally worked properly. The F-105 had done its job, carried the air war through the heaviest years, but the design had limits, and those limits were showing. The air-to-air kills represented tactical success within strategic failure. Yes, the Thunderchief could fight MiGs. Yes, pilots achieved victories against purpose-built interceptors, but the victories came at the cost of unbombed targets and extended campaigns and losses that mounted faster than politicians would tolerate indefinitely. 27.5 MiGs destroyed. Hundreds of bridges and power plants that should have been destroyed but weren't, because formations jettisoned ordnance to survive the MiG threat. The numbers tell different stories depending on what you're counting. Last F-105 air-to-air kill, November 1968. After that date, the records show no more confirmed MiG destructions by Thunderchief pilots. F-4 Phantoms handled most air superiority missions by then. Dedicated fighter sweeps. MiG-CAPs protecting strike packages. The institutional shift moved air-to-air responsibility to aircraft designed for it. F-1 MiG-21s continued flying. Strike missions against targets in North Vietnam and Laos. Wild weasel operations hunting SAM sites. The two-seat F-105Fs kept suppressing surface-to-air threats through 1970 and beyond. But the MiG engagements stopped. Not because MiGs stopped flying, because American tactical organization changed. Fighters escorted bombers. Bombers bombed. Division of labor. The 27.5 kills achieved between 1966 and November 1968. Compressed time frame. Most kills happened during the peak engagement period of 1967, when VPAF sortie rates ran highest and American strike packages faced constant intercept attempts. April through August 1967 accounts for a significant portion of the total. Confirmed F-105 losses to all causes over entire Vietnam War, 382 aircraft. The number varies slightly depending on which accounting method you use. Some sources say 397, some say 382. The discrepancy comes from whether you count aircraft that crashed in Thailand after battle damage or aircraft written off due to combat damage but never officially shot down. Either number is brutal. Air-to-air losses specifically. Harder to determine. Many F-105s went down to multiple causes simultaneously. SAM damage, plus MiG gunfire, plus anti-aircraft artillery. Credit the loss to what killed the aircraft, usually the SAM, but the MiG contributed. Records often don't specify clearly enough to separate causes. What's documented? F-105 as a dedicated dogfighter posted competitive numbers. What's also documented? F-105 as a strike aircraft in heavily defended airspace died at rates no Air Force could sustain indefinitely. The 27.5 kills came from situations where pilots could choose to fight. The hundreds of losses came from situations where pilots had to press the attack regardless. Post-war analysis by Air Force historians compared F-105 performance against other aircraft types, kill per sortie ratios, loss per sortie ratios, mission success rates. The Thunderchief performed its primary mission, strike operations, adequately but expensively. The secondary mission, air combat, better than expected, but still secondary. The aircraft that achieved the most F-105 kills, Carl Richter with 3 confirmed. Multiple pilots got 2, most got 1. The distribution shows air-to-air success wasn't concentrated among a few aces, spread across squadrons and timeframes. Different pilots in different circumstances proving the same point. Thuds could fight. F-105 production ended in 1964. Total aircraft built, 833. By 1970, the fleet was aging, worn, depleted. No replacement aircraft coming. The survivors kept flying strike missions and wild weasel operations, but the glory days, if you can call them that, were over. F-4ES dominated the air-to-air mission. F-105ES did what they were built for originally, bombed things. The 27.5 number stands in official histories, confirmed through gun camera footage, wreckage analysis, North Vietnamese records when available. Not disputed. Not impressive compared to F-4 totals or Korean War F-86 numbers, but remarkable given what the aircraft was designed to do and what circumstances forced it to do instead. Last Thud Flying Combat Mission, 1984. Air National Guard. F-105ES flew their final operational sorties decades after Vietnam ended. The MiG kills happened in a compressed window of a brutal war. The aircraft outlasted its combat reputation by years, served in reserve units, trained new pilots, eventually retired to museums. 27.5 victories, 382 losses. The math doesn't favor the Thunderchief, but the kills happened anyway. Post-Vietnam tactical analysis consumed thousands of pages across multiple Air Force studies. What worked? What failed? What killed pilots? What needs to change before the next war? F-105. Experience influenced conclusions throughout. Strike aircraft need self-defense capability, not theoretical capability. Actual weapons, actual training, actual doctrine for employing both when fighters bounce you during a bombing run. The institutional assumption before Vietnam: strike aircraft avoid air combat, fighters provide escort, division of labor keeps everyone alive. Vietnam proved that assumption wrong. Strike packages got separated. Escorts missed intercepts. Bomb haulers fought alone or died. F-105 success in air combat. Limited, expensive, but real. Demonstrated that strike pilots could fight if trained and equipped properly. The lesson influenced next-generation aircraft design. F-111 gained terrain-following radar and advanced avionics, partially from Thud experience. A 10 Warthog designed for close air support carried the GAU-8 Avenger cannon and AIM-9 Sidewinders from conception. Every American strike aircraft after Vietnam had credible self-defense armament and pilots trained to use it. Training emphasis shifted across tactical air command. Air combat maneuvering became mandatory for all pilots, regardless of primary mission. The syllabus at Nellis expanded. Fighter Weapons School, Top Gun's Air Force equivalent, stressed that any aircraft might end up in a dogfight. Wild Weasel training incorporated extensive ACM because SAM hunters operated in environments where MiG threats were guaranteed. Ordnance jettison doctrine formalized. Before Vietnam, it was emergency procedure. After Vietnam, it became standard tactical option. Brief it in mission planning. Practice it in training. Execute it without hesitation when fighters appear. The bombs can be replaced. The pilot can't. Accepting mission failure to preserve aircraft and crew became institutionally acceptable in ways it wasn't before 1965. The recognition that doctrine and reality diverge under combat stress influenced command philosophy. Centralized planning, decentralized execution. Give pilots enough autonomy to make tactical decisions in the moment. Don't require ground controller approval for every maneuver. Trust training and judgment. Soviet model, rigid doctrine, centralized control, looked worse after Vietnam than before. American model, flexible response, pilot initiative, looked better despite all the other failures. Equipment improvements came slowly. Better radar warning receivers. Improved ECM pods. Upgraded weapon systems. Most changes happened too late for F-105 crews in 1967, but helped subsequent aircraft and subsequent wars. Institutional learning takes time. Procurement takes longer. But the lessons got documented and eventually implemented. The cultural impact lasted decades. Fighter pilots who flew F-105s in Vietnam influenced tactical development through the 1970s and 1980s. They knew what worked. They knew what killed people. They pushed for changes based on experience, not theory. Wild Weasel tactics evolved into suppression of enemy air defenses doctrine that dominated planning for every conflict afterward. F-15 Eagle design specifications included emphasis on air superiority capability that traced back to Vietnam lessons. Not because F-15S would do strike missions, they wouldn't initially, but because Air Force leadership recognized that air dominance enabled everything else. Can't bomb targets if MiGs control the airspace. Can't suppress SAMs if fighters keep bouncing the Wild Weasels. The institutional priority shifted toward achieving air superiority first, everything else second. 27.5 MiG kills by F-105 pilots influenced tactical aviation more than the number suggests. Not because the kills proved Thuds were great fighters, because the kills proved that strike pilots could fight when circumstances required and training prepared them. The lesson? Train everyone for combat, equip everyone for survival, trust everyone to execute when doctrine fails and reality intervenes. The Thunderchief taught that lesson expensively, but the lesson stuck. Colonel Jack Broughton retired from the Air Force in 1968. 3 MiG kills flying F-105s, 2 MiG-17s, 1 MiG-21, all with the M61 Vulcan cannon. All at ranges under 1,000 feet. Gun camera footage from all 3 engagements survived and eventually got declassified. He donated the film to the National Museum of the United States Air Force decades later. Interview in 2008, 40 years after his last combat mission. Reflection on what made the Thunderchief effective in a role it wasn't designed for. His answers stayed consistent across multiple interviews over the years. The airplane was honest, heavy, fast, tough. You couldn't finesse it like a Phantom. But if you understood the energy equations and didn't try making it something it wasn't, it would fight. The gun camera footage he took shows the closing geometry clearly. First engagement, MiG-17 in a left-hand turn, Broughton's F-105 cutting inside the radius. Brief tracking window, maybe 1 full second. Vulcan fires. Rounds impact wing root and fuselage. MiG rolls inverted, enters uncontrolled descent. Second engagement. Head-on pass converted to pursuit. The MiG-17 pilot tried to extend. Broughton stayed with him. Another 1-second burst. Hits along the fuselage centerline. Aircraft came apart. Third kill, the MiG-21, happened during a strike mission near Hanoi. Broughton's flight got bounced during egress. He jettisoned external tanks and bombs, reversed into the threat. The MiG-21 pilot didn't expect that response. Tried to disengage. Broughton closed to 800 feet. Fired. The tracking wasn't perfect. Gun camera shows rounds walking across the MiG's tail section, but enough connected. Vertical stabilizer separated. Aircraft entered flat spin. Pilot ejected. What Broughton remembered most wasn't the kills. He said this in multiple interviews, always emphasized it. What stuck with him was the missions where MiGs bounced his formation during bomb runs, and half the flight jettisoned ordnance defending themselves, and the target sat there untouched for another week. The tactical victories that produced strategic delays. We'd come back with gun camera footage showing a MiG kill, and the intelligence officers would be congratulating us, and all I could think about was that bridge we were supposed to drop. Still standing. Still carrying trucks full of supplies south. We'd have to go back tomorrow or next week and try again. Maybe die trying. Because we fought MiGs instead of bombing the target. The moral calculus bothered him. Individual pilot survival versus mission completion. His training said complete the mission. His instinct said survive. Most times survival won. Jettison the bombs, fight the MiG, live to fly another day. Rational decision. But the strategic cost accumulated across hundreds of similar decisions by hundreds of pilots over years of war. Broughton wrote books about his Vietnam experience after retirement. Thud Ridge remains the definitive F-105 pilot memoir. Describes the flying, the fighting, the losses, the bureaucratic failures that got pilots killed, the tactical successes that didn't matter strategically. His writing was bitter sometimes. Angry at politicians and generals and planners who made decisions from safe distances. But about the airplane and the pilots who flew it, nothing but respect. The Thud did everything we asked and more. The problem was what we were asking made no sense half the time. The gun camera footage sits in climate-controlled storage at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. 3 kills. 3 seconds of film per engagement. Evidence that strike aircraft could fight interceptors and win. Evidence purchased with unbombed targets and extended wars and losses that mounted faster than victories accumulated. Broughton died in 2014. Age 89. Outlived most of his squadron mates by decades.